Are you have an introduction, a literature review, methodology, your findings and data analysis, and then your conclusions. So it's due March 22nd, and I think keeping my fingers crossed it can happen. But Dr. Lou's been really supportive and giving me really good constructive criticism. So it's been a good experience so far. These are some of the numbers I've been looking at. So it's very numbers based. You have to know how to analyze the numbers, interpret them, and apply them to your project and your research. So next, hopefully, New York City. I haven't applied to any jobs yet. I want to get my thesis done first. But I've been looking, and there's some possibilities out there. But I'll start really working on the job hunt next month. So, and that concludes. Any questions? Comments?
I have a question.
One question.
So, as a senior undergrad, when would you recommend for someone to start looking at graduate schools or programs?
Well, I took 2 years off in between, but it just depends if you want to start grad school right away, if you want some time off. It just depends on what you think you need. But
how long is the process?
For applying?
Yeah.
I took the GRE, I think in March 2011, and then I applied in May, or April or May 2011,
Okay.
I think. And then I got my acceptance in June, and then I quit my job in July.
But if you're looking for an assistantship, it has to be
Earlier.
Okay.
And if you want to apply for scholarships too.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So,
Okay.
thank you, Sarah.
You're welcome.
We're going to have Megan.
Good job.
She's going to tell you why the strange man is on the screen here.
Okay, so I just chose an image of Raymond Duncan. He's the topic of my thesis, and I've been working really hard on writing about his life and the textiles and garments that he designed. So he's kind of like the background for everything right now. He's the background on my computer screen, and he's like reminding me to keep working. Is there everyone else in the presentation room with my notes?
We'll make his hands.
Okay, let me see. There. So my name is Megan Martinelli, and I graduated from Providence College in 2008, and I actually had a Bachelor of Arts in English Literature, but I also had 15 credits of studio art. I ended up taking a class, an introduction to costume history, where I started to realize that I was really interested in learning more about fashion and clothing and the history of dress. I also worked part-time at Nordstrom and a consignment shop in Providence called Second Time Around, and my grades weren't really good the first two semesters of college, so I ended up taking a semester off and trying to decide if I still, what I wanted to do, and then I came back and finished with my degree, and I graduated in December of 2008. I ended up taking 2 years off. Again, I really just wanted another chance to go back to school and show that I could do my research and get better grades and find something that I was really interested in. While I was working at the consignment shop, I was really interested in learning more about the vintage pieces that were coming in. As a child, I really liked the American Girl dolls and fashion history in that sense, and so I started to research and read as many publications as I could during that time. I also met someone named Brianna Moon, who was a graduate of the undergraduate program. She worked with me at the consignment shop, and she told me all about the program and recommended that I start looking more actively into it. So I did. And in, I guess, let me see. I guess in the spring of 2010, or it was, yeah, spring of 2010, I was putting everything together to apply. I took the GREs like Sarah, and don't ever take the GREs in the summer, because when I did, the air conditioner broke down and it was a nightmare. Like, I wanted to cancel my scores, but I ended up passing. So when I started the program, I was really stressed. I really was enjoying myself. I started in fall of 2010. I was really happy, and I really enjoyed taking research methods where I learned how to formulate my own research proposal and wrote my own version of a thesis proposal. I didn't ultimately go with the topic that I wrote about, but it taught me the different types of sources that I should be looking for, using the Helen catalog online, looking at the Costume Society of America's publication Dress, and looking at what types of good scholarly books to look at for textile history. And then in the past fall of 2010, I had an internship at the RISD Museum. I was a curatorial intern. While I was there, I learned how to use like the museum database. I was able to curate my own small rotation for the 20th century gallery that's going to be going up in June. And I worked on the Dande exhibit, which is upcoming in April for the museum there. And the head curator there is a URI grad program. So she related a lot to some of the things that I was going through. This last spring, I had a material culture, I was taking a material culture class with Dr. Welters, and I had kind of gotten to know her during our trip to Europe the past winter, and she had mentioned to me about this dress that was made by Raymond Duncan, who, I don't know if anybody's familiar with modern dance history at all. His sister was Isadora Duncan, and she, in the early 20th century, was a dancer who kind of revived ancient Grecian dress in a very modern way that was kind of shocking and scandalous at the time. But her older brother was Raymond Duncan, and he started these little art colonies in France at the turn of the century, where he was teaching people how to paint and decorate and block print on textiles and clothing. And here in our collection at URI, we have a dress that he created at his colony in France, and it's from the 1920s, and it's silk, and it's all hand painted and block printed. And so basically it was my material culture project, but I also knew that I needed to write a thesis on this because there wasn't a lot of research done on him at all. And he was barely mentioned in costume history books, and nobody had really talked about him before me. I mean, there was some mention, and there was a lot of his objects. Once I researched all of the different collections across the country, there were many of his objects out there, but nobody had written a book or a study that discussed these objects. So it was up to me to do that. So that's where I came to my original research. So again, I was looking for other examples of the textiles that spring. I found some at the Met in New York City. Those are two examples that I'll be writing about in my thesis. I also found two pieces at FIDM Museum in California. There's one object at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. There were 3 at the Smithsonian Cooper Hewitt collections, 3 at the Art Institute of Chicago, 1 at the Oakland Museum of Art. Every single time I do this, it doesn't let me scroll through to see the rest of my notes. Yeah, I couldn't. So there were 2 more. There were more in Boston at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, the MFA. I looked at a total of 20 objects, and the dress and the tunic on the screen are from the Met. So then I also needed to find more primary sources on Raymond Duncan, so that back in. Okay. So how do I look at the rest of my notes? Well, I don't know. So I needed to find more primary sources to complete this research. So because he was only mentioned briefly in biographies of his sister, he was more famous than he was. So I looked for papers and photos and other material related to Raymond Duncan at the special collections in different museums and universities. I found some online at the special collections at the Syracuse University Library. I found more at the Bancroft Library at UC Berkeley in California. I also found some at Stanford University in Palo Alto, California. And I also went through lots of newspaper archives and records trying to find information on Raymond Duncan and his lifestyle. Those included the New York Times, Chronicling America database on the Library of Congress's webpage. I searched the databases on URI's Helen catalog, like all the time, like several times a week, looking for any scholarly journal articles or new developments on Raymond Duncan. Many of them were about Isadora, but he had such a big role in her life that I was able to pull from her biographies to get a better picture of his life. So right now, I'm in the middle of writing the proposal and thesis. Writing the thesis, I did write the proposal. I wrote a research plan based on E. Fleming's material culture object analysis model. And then I applied for several grants because all of the places that I mentioned are far away and I needed money to get that research done. I was awarded the EGRA grant through the graduate school, a graduate research grant from the URI Center for Humanities, and some funds from the Human Sciences and Services, which is this college. I traveled to all of the locations that I mentioned, including California, and now I'm writing my master's thesis based on all this data collection. And it is original research because nobody's written on any of his objects before. And I don't really know what's next because I have to get to May.
What's the cartoon?
Oh, it's a cartoon of Raymond Duncan beating up people in 1910 in California in a newspaper. So he was a tough man. He dressed entirely like he was from ancient Greece for most of his life, and he created textiles. So he's been very interesting to write about. And Dr. Walters was my major professor for this, so she's putting up with my frazzledness.
We've been there, so. Yeah. If you guys have any questions about graduate school or